Okay, good afternoon, and welcome to 25 Minutes with Cap, where each month we discuss recent trends in the specialty insurance space. I'm Adam Sills, and I run our specialty insurance business here at CapSpecialty. Today, I'm excited to have Joe Brandon joining us. Joe's the president and CEO of Alleghany Corporation. Prior to Alleghany, he was the chairman and CEO of Gen Re and received his undergrad from Wharton. Joe, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here.
So as we go on from here, if you have questions through the session, feel free to enter them into the chat and we'll do our best to answer them. Just a reminder, the content of this webinar is the property of CapSpecialty and is for informational purposes only. You're not permitted to republish, share, or quote from this webinar without the prior written consent of CapSpecialty, which can be obtained by contacting marketing@capspecialty.com. I've asked Joe to be candid in this discussion, so we'll use the Chatham House rules. Share the information you receive, but don't reveal the identity of who said it. So we hope you enjoy the discussion. Joe, first I wanted to start, I have a bunch of industry trend questions, but before getting into some of those, how'd you get into insurance?
Well, I think it was like most people, it was a mistake. No, there's one of my quotes that I always remember is from a Kurt Vonnegut science fiction novel that he wrote in 1959 called Sirens of Titan. And most people have heard of Kurt Vonnegut, but not many people realize he wrote science fiction novels. And the protagonist was supposed to be the savior, and the savior came back to Earth. He was supposed to say a certain phrase, and when they asked him, how did you get here? He said, I was a victim of a series of accidents, as are we all. And that was the exact phrase the savior was supposed to say. So I was a victim of a series of accidents. So my maternal grandfather found himself with a son-in-law who had just married his youngest daughter, except his son-in-law didn't have a job. He was a managing general agent or underwriter for USF&G. Right. Old line company that's now part of St. Paul, rolled up into Travelers many years ago. And his MGA produced something like 8% of USF&G's business. So I think he twisted some arm, got him to hire my father. So of course, as my father's oldest son, I decided, well, the last thing I was going to do was insurance. And as Mike Sapner said, likes to say, his father was in insurance too. I really showed them. I went into reinsurance.
At least you went into reinsurance.
Right. Being the rebellious type, I went into reinsurance. No, I was a CPA, and one of my clients, I had very interesting clients, but one of them was an insurance company, and I actually thought it was the most interesting of my clients. I audited the Patriot missile system at Raytheon before anybody heard of it, digital corporation who displaced IBM from the mid-range computers. But the insurance, the actuarial, the marketing, the people aspects, the administration, I just thought it had everything. And somebody used to say that insurance is had the highest ratio of dollars to brains of any industry. Which I didn't think was a very nice thing to say. But if you're young and you're ambitious, it kind of spelled opportunity. So I ended up in insurance, and I've loved it ever since the company however many years ago, 35 years ago or so, and still enjoy it every day. You can relate. Everything on the front page of your newspaper is related to insurance somehow, and every day. The more time you spend in this business, the more you understand you don't really understand it. Just something new every single day about how it works.
What's the latest
insurance?
To that point, what's the latest thing that you've learned that you're surprised about the industry?
I don't think. Well, the latest big thing. I don't think I understood the difference between, all risks aviation, aviation war, contingent all risks, and aviation war. These were words that I'd heard, but had never really I don't think anybody had in their model. I'm not allowed to say that Russia stole 500 planes,
Sure.
but that 500 planes got confiscated all at one time. I don't think anybody had that in their tail scenarios. And, and same thing with the pandemic. I mean, lots of people were in pandemic scenarios, but nobody, I don't think anybody's scenario, I think everybody focused on the mortality
Sure.
and the life insurance losses and the morbidity, accident and health. I don't think anybody really thought through what it meant to, basically put the economy into a medically induced coma and what the fallout from that would be. And then, what happens when you try to bring it back out of the coma, which is what we're going through now. So even when you have these tail event scenarios, even when you have them in your inventory of scenarios, inevitably it unfolds differently than you expected.
Sure.
So those are just the latest two.
Sure. So you go to Gen Re. Gen Re sold to Warren Buffett. You end up having another dinner.
Right.
How did it come about?
Well, at Gen Re, I started in the marketing area. And then I was there a little over a year, and I think I was 31, and the CFO got seconded to, we had a problem and he needed to go spend full time on that. And I like to say I was the beneficiary of poor succession planning, because Gen Re didn't have anybody ready to step into this person's shoes. So I wandered down to the CEO's office. I mean, what did I know? I was 31. And I said, I'll make you a deal. You need somebody to go do this. I've done it before. Put me
from the marketing department.
From the marketing department, which is where you find all your great CFOs. They all come from marketing. Most people don't realize that, Adam. So I went down to Ron Ferguson's office and said, I think I can help you. You need somebody to do this. I've done it before. When the predecessor, the incumbent comes back, I'll just go back to my marketing job. I'm fine, but you need somebody, and I think I'd enjoy it. And I think, you're not going to do it. And if you want to recruit from the outside, go ahead and recruit. I'll go back and do my marketing job, which I liked.
Yeah.
And so he said it was a deal. And then, 9 months later, he made me permanent CFO. So in 96, it occurred to me, it was like late April of 96, I still have the email, where I just realized there was this fundamental collision between the basic business of reinsurance, which is assuming volatility, and Gen Re sold at a high multiple. We were one of the few companies that produced an underwriting profit. It was like a 20% return on equity business. And what our investors expected was nice, smooth, growing quarterly earnings. And yet what we were telling our clients was, give us your volatility. Well, at some point, what we were doing for our clients conflicted with what our shareholders expected. And it seemed easier to change shareholders than it seemed to change business. So I wrote an email to Ron Ferguson saying, hey, I really ought to think, you should think about becoming part of Berkshire. They understand that insurance is lumpy returns. It's a good return, but it's a lumpy return. 2 years later, that ended up happening in 1998. And then, I ended up at Alleghany when I helped Alleghany acquire Trans Re back in 2011. It closed in 2012. I joined then, and then had responsibility for the insurance and reinsurance side. And then wrote my first shareholders letter in January and February. And, was sitting here on, I guess, Friday morning, the 25th of February. And I thought, I ought to send this to Warren. Weston used to send his letters to Warren. He's used to getting monthly letters from me anyway, back from Gen Re. So I just sent it to him. I didn't expect a response. I even kind of gave him an out saying, my guess is you're swamped with this stuff right now. So if he didn't want to write back, he wouldn't feel obligated.
Sure.
And, a few hours later, I got an email back saying, how would you like to have dinner on March 6th? I have an idea I'd like to run by you. Da 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 da. And so we had dinner on, I guess it was Monday, March 6th. And, we were chatting along. Dinner was about 2.25 hours. We only talked about the deal for about 20 minutes. So after about 25 minutes, he says, well, I have this idea. And well, anyway, 850 firm with an asterisk. Like 850 firm. I think he just made me an offer for all of Alleghany at $850 a share. And the asterisk was, I don't want to pay your investment banker fees. So that comes off the 850. And, we talked a little bit about how it would work. And I told him that, I wasn't the decider. We had a board and there was a process we had to go through. And then we moved on to talking about other things. And I told him he said, I've given you an option to sell me the company. I didn't put an expiration date on it, but it doesn't last forever. And I said, well, how about by Thursday? I'll call you by Thursday morning and I'll let you know at a minimum if we're interested in continuing to talk to you. And that was 3 days later. He was like, oh, that's fine. So we called him on Thursday morning, Chris Dalrymple and I. And the first thing I had to get him to do was repeat his offer because nobody at Alleghany had heard it except me. So it was like, I didn't have anything in writing. The board only heard from me. I was like, can you just reconfirm what I
were they surprised?
Yes, I think they were surprised. I think, yeah, but Alleghany is a kind of different collection of businesses. We have the 3 insurance companies, each of which are performing very well: CapSpecialty, RSUI, and TransRe. And people think of that as a relatively natural fit with Berkshire. It's the non-financial services business. We have 8 of them. 3 of them are quite large, meaning they'll do over $1 billion of revenue this year. Pre-tax earnings of probably over 100 million or very close. I mean, those are sizable businesses. And, but they're a steel company, a toy company, and a biopharma design engineering and construction engineering, consulting firm. They don't build things, they design things. And, not everybody who wants to own a toy company wants to own a steel company.
Right.
Given Berkshire, it was a good fit. So, and then, the $22.5 billion of investments we had was also attractive.
Sure.
Almost all of which sits in the insurance companies.
Where does Warren Buffett go to dinner when he comes to New York City? I imagine that you can't just go out to a restaurant.
We had dinner at the Essex House, which is where he was staying.
Right.
Genry owns a subsidiary from 40 years ago that bought a condo at the Essex House back in like the 1979 real estate depression for like $150,000. It's probably like a $4 million condo now on Central Park South. So Warren likes to stay there. It's nothing, I gotta tell you, it's nothing special, but he likes to stay there. And so I'll tell you a little funny story. This Chatham House rule has to apply to this one.
Sure.
So whenever he stayed, I used to have our help desk on call. And, in case he wanted to use the computer and da-da-da-da-da. The only thing the help desk ever got a call for was, how does the TV clicker work?
Amazing.
So I used to send this poor woman, Roberta, down to sit in the lobby of the Essex House and get the TV working.
So you're talking a tiny bit about the transaction, and you imagine when the holding company, when a place like Berkshire buys a holding company, a lot stays the same. But what do you see changing?
Well, I was thinking over the weekend, would you rather work for Berkshire shareholders or index funds? And Larry Fink. And so, I think Alleghany insulated most of its operating subsidiaries from, the day-to-day pressures of capital markets and rating agencies and, what gets written in the trade press. I think we get another whole layer of insulation with Berkshire. And I think that allows us to concentrate on playing the game on the playing field and not worrying about what the crowd thinks. If we think we're doing the right thing, and we'll put points on the board, we'll get credit for the points on the board, and we don't have to worry about every 90 days, if somebody fly specking through our results and says, oh, CapSpecialty's attritional loss ratio is up 1/10 this quarter over last quarter.
Right.
What great meaning does that mean? Well, nothing. The actuaries rounded down last quarter and they rounded up this quarter.
Sure.
Surety was a bigger part of the mix. Surety was a smaller part of the mix. I mean, just because you can do the math doesn't mean it's meaningful. So I think we get to run our business, for the long term, but I also think it allows us to have a sense of urgency in this, in the context of we should have less bureaucracy. So on one hand, we're going to take a long view and do what makes sense, so the business is more valuable 5 years from now. On the other hand, once we've made a decision, we don't need to run it through 4 committees and justify it and write white papers. We can make the decision forward.
Right. One of the last question, we were talking about reinsurance. You had a quote last year that investors had left reinsurers for dead. Warren Buffett's a reasonably sophisticated investor. He, Alleghany has a large part of it as being a reinsurance company. What's he seeing that other people aren't seeing?
Well, I think this will make Berkshire effectively the world's 4th largest reinsurer. Now, they don't present themselves to the world, as one storefront.
Sure.
Behind, Lloyd's is its own animal. I never know how to count Lloyd's, but, behind Munich, Swiss, Hanover, and then Berkshire. Reinsurance was a wonderful, wonderful business in the 1960s, most of the 1970s, most of the 1980s, up until the late 1990s. Tremendous returns on equity. They had capital advantages over primary companies. They had information advantages over primary companies, especially on what excess layers were worth. It got hit hard with a couple medical malpractice crises and some asbestos and environmental claims and inflation. But by and large, these were very good businesses. And then their clients got better, and the reinsurance brokers got larger and better. And as a result, some of the economics that were previously captured in the value chain by reinsurers flowed back towards primary companies. It's a little trivial, but think of the internet as, one way of leveling the information advantage, it wasn't the only way. And the brokers capture, a lot. It used to be 80% of the reinsurance was written direct by Swiss, Munich, employed in January in the U.S., and it's probably less than 20% written direct today.
It was 80%. I didn't appreciate
probably 80% to brokers at this point. All those large transactions can still be done direct, but the predominant business model is brokers. And so, the economics changed around, and, reinsurance done well should be, meaning disciplined, should be a cost of capital, maybe a little bit better business, especially if you have the investment latitude that Berkshire has because they're so overcapitalized. But it's not the business it used to be. And I think back when I said that quote in the fall, investors had just written off reinsurance as a commoditized, dead business, and it was selling for, 80% a book or something. And you want to go, okay, my point is, it's not as good a business as it used to be, but it's not dead. And I think what you're beginning to see is, obviously there's this group of mid-tier reinsurers. TransRe was in there, Everest is in there, RenRe is in there, SCOR is in there,
Yeah.
this is in there, XL is kind of in there. Where are these companies going to be in 5 years? Because it's not that they're in a bad spot today, but that spot's not, I wrote an email a few weeks ago saying, small cap reinsurer is now officially an oxymoron. Mid cap reinsurer is going to become an oxymoron at some point. Reinsurers need to be owned by large, well-capitalized business where the volatility either is smoothed out by other operations or they can afford to take the volatility. And I think this is, one of the benefits of this transaction is it gives each of Allegheny's insurance companies a permanent home. I think Berkshire is a good home for all three companies. I think all three companies are additive to what Berkshire already has today in their own way. And, but especially for TransRe, because TransRe ultimately was going to come to a strategic fork in the road at some point, as I believe all mid-cap reinsurers will.
Right.
That's not to say they're not going to go away or they aren't going to be successful, but they're going to have to confront the challenge.
Another place you've seen consolidation, a ton of consolidation, is in distribution, and not just with retailers, but also with wholesalers. How much of a concern do you think that that's going to be? Okay, there's been consolidation with reinsurers, but there's certainly not a shortage of carriers or MGAs taking risk.
Yeah, I think the underwriting side of the business is got a ways to go to catch up with the consolidation that's happened on the distribution side. I'll just use that term broadly. Interestingly, and you probably know this at CapSpecialty, of course you have corporate relationships with your major producers.
Sure.
But each of your underwriters and marketers have relationships with individuals at those producers. And those relationships are, I would say, equally important. And sometimes you see it, a producer moves from one distributor to another, and CapSpecialty continues to do the same amount of business with that particular broker,
sure,
even though they're wearing a different jersey
sure.
they were a few weeks ago. So RSUI goes through an interesting exercise where clearly at the corporate level, the percentage of their business produced by their top 5 brokers is much larger than it was 7-8 years ago.
Yeah.
When you look at the number of, if you actually look at the individual brokers, they're doing more business today. There's more individual brokers they're doing business with today or 5 years ago. So while the employers have consolidated, brokers are pretty entrepreneurial folk. I mean, anybody who's tried to make a living selling things on commission, that's not an easy way. That's not an easy job.
No.
By nature, they're entrepreneurial. And yes, what corporate says matters, but they also have their clients and their relationships, both on the underwriting side and on the distribution side, that they're very protective of. And if they have a good relationship with an underwriter and they can get the business done quick, the quotes are reasonable, nobody's jerking them around, they can get it done and move on to the next piece of business, you become a favored underwriter.
We've seen the same thing, and it's particularly in the brokerage side. One of the places where we've wondered if that's not as much the case is maybe on some of the program or the binding business, that where there's really been a drive to consolidation. Of course,
Yeah. Look, I've never seen a lot of money made by the underwriters on program or binding authority business. It is clearly the exception. That business is a lot harder. You know, you build a black box, you try to get the algorithm right. You know, then you have things that go through referrals, and then the referrals perform more poorly than the ones that were written automatically. It's a tough business, and I understand why producers, you know, like that part of the value chain, catch a few more points of commission on it. But the risk takers, you know, whether they're underwriters or the shareholders of the underwriters, have to make a return for putting up the risk capital. And those are businesses where very few people have managed to make attractive returns.
Yeah.
I can't think of any off the top of my head. I'm sure somebody will think of 3 of them as soon as I'm done. But I would argue that they're the exception rather than the rule. That doesn't mean you don't try, but it's a lot of work to not make that much money.
Yep. Agreed. Joe, we have to stop it here. I think we're gonna have to do a part 2 at some point because we've got a lot of we had a lot of other stuff to cover. But
okay.
Hey, really appreciate the time. Really
okay, thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thanks.
Have a good day, everybody.